Do you believe that the Taliban has changed? Can they be trusted this time around, Sam?
They've had 20 years. Their leadership has had 20 years, in a sense, engaging in some respect with modern technology, with smartphones, which didn't exist back in 2001. They've been part of international diplomacy for several years here in Qatar. They have one of their top leaders, Mullah Baradar, has met frequently with the American negotiators. They are part of that structure. The issue for them will be their rank and file supporters who've been effectively brainwashed, fed a very kind of medieval view, a very crude view of Islam, and that is the only kind of education that they've had, largely illiterate fighters that they have who are pumped full of a very uncompromising version of Islam, and a very primitive one at that. Whether they can actually take those fighters with them as they try to engage in a more nuanced role, or whether they simply fold themselves back into that very medieval idea of how they're going to govern the country, and then we'll see a repeat of what we saw between 96 and 2001, where women were banned from schools and homosexuals were stoned to death. Peter?
Now that the last American flight has left, Sam, we can talk about legacy. I mean, people have been talking about that for a while now anyway, but what do you believe is the legacy of the Afghan war?
Broken hearts in Afghanistan, 20 years of faith put by an urban population. And remember that the population of Kabul at the time the Taliban were deposed was maybe 500,000. It's now about 4 million. These are predominantly people who had faith in a emerging modern state, or the emergence towards a modern state. It was by no means a democracy, but belief in the sorts of attitudes and cultural norms that the West so cherishes, that the West so frequently goes to war to protect it. At least it claims that's why it goes to war. And now they've been abandoned. So 123,000 people, most of them Afghans, have fled the country because they fear a return to medievalism. So that is heartbreak for them. I think that the legacy of the Afghan war will be picked over by historians for years to come. In the immediate geostrategic sense, this gives Pakistan a very powerful level of leverage with Kabul. It's probably the most influential country over the Taliban. That will rattle the Indians somewhat. Both of them nuclear powers, those two countries, both of them daggers drawn most of the time. So that is a significant shift there. And we'll have to see what happens geostrategically. But in terms of the personal legacy, whether you're Australian, British, American, or any member of these coalition, all of these countries have bled into the soil of Afghanistan and wasted a gigantic amount of money only to see the Taliban back in power.
And just finally, what's Joe Biden's role in all of this?
Well, he inherited the plans to withdraw rapidly from Afghanistan from his predecessor, Donald Trump. He's come under a great deal of criticism, particularly, obviously, from the Republican Party. And this one is something that is really sticking to him. This is his foreign policy agony, if you like. He had always maintained that the mission in Afghanistan to get rid of al-Qaeda had been accomplished, and that the nation-building mission was a waste of blood and money. And so he was always anxious to get out. It has been criticised for the rapidity with which he got out. He's counter-argued and said, well, we could have put more men and women and risked more lives and stayed almost indefinitely. But the Republicans are making hay over this, not least because they point to places like North Korea, where the United States has spent much more money for many more years trying to maintain peace there between North and South Korea.
Yep, it'd be very interesting to see what happens following the midterms and those calls for impeachment grow louder. Sam, Kiley, really good to get your insights this morning. Appreciate your time live from Doha following that huge news this morning that the last American flight has left Kabul.